If you're listening on podcast, be sure to tune in to our YouTube channel for more content. The link is in the description.
Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast. Welcome back to Wild and Weird Radio, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for another weekly installment. We cannot thank you enough for all of the downloads and all the views that you're giving us every single day. Literally, the numbers keep going up and up, and the support is outstanding. If you're listening to this right now on the audio portion, remember, go over and check out the YouTube, because we post visuals. We put up extra video content that you hear us talking about from time to time in the audio. We actually insert the videos into those clips, so that way you can see it and you'll hear us talk about it at the same time as well. Also, from time to time, we do exclusives that are only on video format. That could be giveaways. That could be just generally exclusive content. So you make sure, go over to YouTube, look up Wild and Weird WV, and just go ahead and subscribe and like a video. That's going to help us out tremendously.
Well, anyway, we are continuing our World Contact Day celebration, obviously, for those who were here yesterday, last night, during the live. Thank you so much for coming. Everybody, you know what we teased, so just keep watching the video, and that's all. You're going to see it.
Oh, is this like Passover for alien people?
No, it's not, and we're going to be going into that a lot more right after the news. What do you think? You want to get into the news and so we get into this, because it's a really lengthy.
It's
a
lot of info. It's a lot of data.
It's a heck of a story.
I won't call it really data. I mean, I guess it's data, but like it's a long story.
It's a long story, and it's a really cool story. And it has so many ties to West Virginia again.
It does.
What's crazy is there are so many stories similar to this. We could do probably 100-part series just on similar stories.
Absolutely. Yes. Crazy. So before we get into that and get all excited, let's go to the news desk.
Well, what do we got first on deck in the news department, Brandon?
So we actually ended up having 3, I think, significant things come up that are actually related to the topic tonight. It's kind of odd that, the correlation happened again.
Is it odd, though? I think we're just changing reality. We're manifesting it around ourselves. So you guys need to start having some pure thoughts. No thinking about giant marshmallow men, things like that. Just don't do it.
I start manifesting like a million viewers, a million listeners,
million subscribers. That's
like
what we
Joe
want
Rogan level. Come on,
meteorite.
Right? No, Joe. Bless it. Well, that's already happening. All right. Anyway, let's go. News.
So the first one that I thought was pretty interesting came from the UK. The lady who's head of the space exploration program for the UK actually came out and said that there is no way that humans are the only intelligent life form out there.
Hey, is that the bureau that Doctor Who was like working for? Is that?
God!
I had to do it.
It could be.
I'm trying to remember what they were called.
I was too. It's been a while. I can't remember what it was called.
It's an anagram for Doctor Who.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, so that is interesting, though. So what do they think in this, Brandon, if it's not, human? What does that allude to?
It's Torchwood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Torchwood is one of them. God, that was a good show.
That was a good show.
Up until the last season, and it got weird, but that's because America took over. Anyway, so she thinks it's probably going to be like a single cell organism or something like that. But I think I remember seeing that an astrophysicist actually crunched the math on it, and there's no way that it's just single cell organisms out there. They think that there's probably life even more complex than us out there that we just can't understand.
It's plausible. I know which astrophysicist you're talking about, who's crunched all the numbers and stuff, and it based off his equation and the way he worked it, like it's highly probable that there's something out there that's more advanced than we are. Maybe not technology wise, but biologically.
I think it's ludicrous to assume that we're talking about single cell organisms, but that is the first step. And I said that had to happen, right? We said that multiple times.
Many years ago.
We have to admit, and we have to come to the conclusion that there is something life form based that we can understand before we could ever understand things that we can't understand, if that makes sense, when it comes to intelligence and life and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
It's just a lot easier for people to understand that, there's space amoebas rather than, there's Q.
Right. Because if they discover there was something like Q, that would break them.
Yeah. Just,
I think a lot of sci-fi was actually accurate because there's some sci-fi shows that had like what were basically intelligent gas clouds that our definition of intelligence isn't the universe's definition.
Gene Roddenberry, I don't know what he was tapping into, or, I have no idea, but a lot of his concepts, man, they were really deep. And you're talking about that gaseous clouds, that ancient alien type beings, like he touched it all. So it's pretty interesting stuff. It really is. But I think
crazy how accurate he was. It's like he had an informant from the future or something.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think he was also the very first person who was buried in space, wasn't he?
I believe that's true, actually. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. His ashes were sent on a rocket. Yeah. What else you got for us?
So the next thing was that Congressman Tim Burkett came out, talked about UFOs again, and this time he says that he is certain that
he's got very strong opinions.
Yeah. He's not afraid to broadcast them either. But he says that since Roswell, he believes America has been reverse engineering alien technology, and he's completely convinced of that. And he wants them to come out and admit to it.
I have to ask myself, I may want to believe this stuff, and it's good to see that these guys are taking this stuff seriously, but how many of them are in the know versus the ones who are just picking up books and reading the same stuff that we have been reading for ages, that it's just new to them because, now it's trendy, so to speak.
I'd say it's probably the more higher ranking ones, like the Speaker of the House probably knows. The majority leader, the minority leader probably does too.
Yeah.
Well, some of the quotes that he was throwing out there, he said directly, I think that a lot that's being reverse engineered right now, but we just don't understand it. He said, this thing is a huge cover up for whatever reason. And I just feel like America's ready. We need to know and to stop with all the shenanigans. If you were a human and made the turns that these things have been seen in some of this footage, you would literally turn into a ketchup package. You would be gone. Period. It's not showing a vapor trail. It's something else out of this world. We've been covering this thing up since the 40s, since Roswell, or even before then, I believe.
Wow.
I remember someone did the math on one of the maneuvers that the Tic Tac did in the video, and they said it would shatter every bone in your body from the G forces.
Yeah, we had actually, back when the Tic Tac video first came out, we had, we were covering it over here on the podcast, and I remember when we were looking at it all, my exact words, I think, you would turn into a red mass of Jello that would be smeared against one wall of the aircraft.
It was an ungodly amount of G forces.
Yeah, it's something in the thousands of pounds that would just
travel like 2,000 feet in like a second or something like that.
Yeah, it would liquefy you would turn in, like he said, it'd be like a ketchup packet that somebody smacked against a wall.
Yeah.
You would be a pile of shattered bone and goo that would be like scraped out of an aircraft. Bottom line.
That one was interesting too. And then there was also a Pentagon chief who came out and claimed that they believe there's an alien mothership in our solar system. Possibly.
Oh yeah, that was weird.
It was Sean Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, that was really weird. Just the headline alone was weird, and the fact that, I would expect a headline like this to be repeated a lot. It was not really repeated a lot. I don't think I really
saw it anywhere else.
No, it made its debut there, and that was pretty much it. Anytime we get those, I kind of have to wonder what the heck's going on,
Yeah, I saw that pop up on Above Top
weird.
Secret, but that was after you had already posted it. That's the only place that I've seen actually posted.
Yeah, that was totally weird.
He's also he was the director of Arrow for a while too, which is interesting.
Oh yeah.
He was also chief scientist at the Defense Intelligence Agency's Missile and Space Intelligence Center. So he's up there. Came out and said that.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, that's impressive.
I think that's another dot we need to put on our board to connect.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's a weird news topic.
It is a weird news topic. You're absolutely right.
Something just randomly come out and say.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're trying to test mass media to see what they're going to put out there and what they want.
It does seem like that. Seems like that, doesn't it? Okay, so was that the news? Are we thinking that's how that's going to go? Kind of.
So.
Yeah, I didn't really see too many other headlines.
All right, then let's close her out.
Well, again, thank you everybody who jumped over with us and carried over from the live yesterday onto this week's deep dive into World Contact Day.
World Contact Day, created by Albert K. Bender.
Yeah, Albert K. Bender's a really interesting guy. We looked into him this week. Like me, I looked into him this week. Ron's probably been doing it a lot longer. And he seemed like he was a lot like us. What is he even doing?
Disappearing, man.
But he did. He seemed like he was a lot like us. He was interested in all the sci-fi and kind of the pop culture side of things. And, Ron and I were talking today about how he had all these kind of collectibles and collection, a menagerie, so to speak, of weird stuff in his home.
Yeah, he did. He was a very interesting individual. And he's really not that different from any other enthusiast, I don't think. The difference comes that he did some weird stuff, and he ended up on the radar of some things. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically just tell you this. Well, not quite, but maybe. The whole story of Albert, because we went over what World Contact Day was yesterday, and we had our little celebration there, but many don't realize the importance of Albert K. Bender. And
the part of the reason why they don't realize the importance of him is, this guy was born over 100 years ago. Yeah, he was born in 1921.
No, he was
He'd be 102.
Yeah,
Almost.
he would be, wouldn't he? Because he died in 2016, I believe.
Yeah, he would have been. He was born over 100 years ago.
That's right.
And he was up until the later parts of his life. Really, even though his experiences were mostly collected through the 50s, 60s, and whatnot, like he stayed pretty kind of on the back end of the radar for a lot of the more mainstream researchers.
Yeah, and you'll figure out why as we go through this. But it's a fascinating individual. He, like you said, he was born in 1921 in Pennsylvania, and he was a collector from a very early age. Man, I mean, the dude. One of the things he liked to do is he would write letters to people all around the world.
He kind of inspired me about this bit.
Yeah, he would write letters to people all around the world and just strike up these conversations. And when I say letters, I'm talking about like 20-page letters sometimes. And he would, become friends with these people, and he would try to get them to send him items like coins and sand or pieces of cloth, anything from their area. And it was, that was kind of like a little eccentric collector tick that he had. And that's pretty cool. I thought that was kind of original. It's kind of like the people who used to do the autograph collecting. That's how they would do it. They would just send out a self-addressed envelope, and sometimes people would send you autographs back. And it's pretty common.
Yeah,
so did they consider him like an occultist back then?
Not yet, but he would be considered that eventually. Yes. But Bender, he enrolled in the U.S. Army during World War II. He didn't get stationed overseas or anything. He was a dental, basically a dental tech, and he worked a lot with that. And I think he ended up in Langley, Virginia, as a dental clerk. Well,
he ended up in Langley, which is probably where the story starts.
Yeah, he
just based off of knowing Langley and its history.
Well, he eventually moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and that's really where our actual story is said to have started. And what was really here, you'd like this little bit about him too, because remember, he was kind of eccentric. So he got a job at Acme Shirko, and which was the world's largest manufacturer of scissors. But then he eventually got a job as the chief timekeeper. So he actually worked with clocks and watches and whatnot.
But that was a stressful job back then.
So much.
Oh, yeah.
He
having to do that manually without a computer. Good God.
So he actually collected a lot of clocks and whatnot, and in his house, which was interesting because he had his house set up with all these macabre things like skulls, like fake skulls and fake things that he had built himself, like
shrunken heads.
Well, you supposed to buy those. No, you supposed to buy those. Those were literally back in the day. You could buy those out of the back of magazines. It was It was a weird time.
Sears Roebuck.
I mean, you could buy monkeys back then. Remember Barry telling stories about the monkeys? I mean, it was crazy. It was just a weird time. But
there's that whole story about the guy up in New York that bought a tiger out of the back of a Roebuck magazine.
I mean, it happened. There's things.
Yeah,
you buy a house too.
Yeah, you can buy houses. Yeah, but. He actually set up his house almost like a haunted house, which was really, I love this part. He actually had sound effects. He had lighting effects. He would kind of go into these little theatrics when he invited guests over, and he would just have fun with them, right? But what happened was that 1947 happened.
1947 was a big year, guys. For those of you who may not be as big of a fan of history of ufology, or you might not be as familiar, we also did an episode on the history of ufology, episodes, plural. You can go back and look those up. I think it was a 2 or 3 part series we did a couple years ago. Yeah. But 1947 was the Roswell crash. 1947 was the Kenneth Arnold sightings. And it was the birth point, the birthing of saucer mania. And it wasn't just here in the United States. It spread around the globe.
Right. It was modern ufology, and this is where it really began, right?
It is.
And at that point, here's this guy, and he's got this interest in weird stuff already. And you asked about the occult thing. He was into occult teachings, yes, and he actually believed that he had the ancestral blood of ancient witches flowed through his veins, as he put it. So he had direct ties.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just say, "Yeah, I was related to so and so." No, when you have somebody that's like, I guess a known occultist or known witch, it's like their blood courses through my veins, and it makes it seem more,
a little more ominous,
official.
Right? It's a little more official, a little more ominous, but either way, he wasn't like heavily into the occult, though. To answer that question, it was more of just all these eclectic kind of thoughts.
He wasn't as into it as like Jack Parsons and his friends were.
Yeah, this guy was just trying to figure out things, and so basically, around the time that Bender began his research, he decided to put together all of his gathered material into a newsletter, because he was gathering all this stuff up from all these sightings that were starting to take place. And he's going to release them in a little newsletter, basically, to people. So remember, now he reached out to all these people before, so he falls back on what he did before. He reaches out to people again, and he has, I think, in the end, somewhere around 600 members of this thing. Pretty much.
Right. People today, they don't realize how big newsletters were.
Yeah. Oh man, newsletters, everybody right now, you hear the word newsletter. And I know me personally, when I hear somebody say, subscribe to our newsletter, I'm instantly like checked out. Like, I'm like, no.
No one's doing that anymore.
Absolutely. No, they do. They do.
No.
And I'm just like, for me personally, I'm like, don't want it.
But most
don't want it. It's one more thing that I have to delete out of my inbox.
Right. But here's
like spam these days.
They weren't inboxes. See, they were actually letters.
Well, it was a mailbox, back then. But that's how you got your news. You didn't have your everything at the tip of your fingers.
Yep.
You had to flip through it.
Yep.
And there was something special about that. Some of these old newsletters, the Bigfoot newsletter, some of the old stuff that John Green was putting out back in the 60s, and then what Bender was doing in the 50s. He essentially organized the very first UFO club.
It was the first UFO club.
And it was the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And like Ron was saying, it was sending out letters to all these people just like he had before, and then was retrieving data back from them. He was getting sighting reports back from them. And again, this isn't like real time. Somebody back then, it's real deal snail mail. I know we use that term as a slang now, but it was legit snail mail. You'd put something in, and then a month later, especially if it's overseas, month and a half, 2 months later, it shows up on your doorstep. But
yeah, it's like if you go back to like the very beginning of America, whenever Congress would pass a new law, they would print out like thousands of these newsletters, and they would send them out, and every town had a town crier that would announce these changes to everybody, and sometimes it would take months.
Yeah.
Like in the Civil War, they were still fighting for a couple of years in some places because they were so remote. They just didn't get the information.
Did not get the memo.
You didn't get the memo? The war is over? Nope. So, yeah, man.
That's what it was in the old days.
But that's
600 newsletters
600.
in 1952.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
And remember, this guy did this out of his attic. This was a home operation, just him and a few friends.
I feel that on a deep personal level.
But Max Kingrel was one of his friends, and he eventually became an officer in the club, and they helped to create this, and it was called the Space Review. That was the newsletter. But around the same time that Bender began this research, he decided to put together all this, and while this was happening, a series of UFO sightings just coincidentally started taking place over Bridgeport, over the area of Bridgeport.
And that's Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yeah, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Numerous sightings suddenly made the news in Bridgeport and surrounding towns at the time. I wondered if the saucer occupants sensed that we were going to look into the mystery of their appearances here on our planet and might be looking us over to see what we were up to. or putting on a show for us, possibly to encourage us. Prior to this, no sighting had been reported in or around Bridgeport, to my knowledge.
And he would be the guy that would know.
Yeah, he would, because he was collecting all these, all these sightings from people. Well, what was weird is, Bender starts this research, and then he starts kind of getting these weird phone calls, and he starts having headaches. Okay. And then he starts saying he's getting these telepathic messages in his head. Now, he sounds paranoid, right? He sounds like he's having like some kind of schizophrenic episode or whatnot. And he even questioned his own sanity, by the way. He wasn't saying, benevolent space brothers are contacting me or anything like that. He was questioning what was going on.
I would be too.
But the crazy thing is, in July 1952, you know what happened there. And Washington, D.C. was buzzed with several incidents of UFOs in the capitals. This made headlines around the world. It began in July 20th, and the sightings were observed visually and on radar. Okay.
Yep.
So,
and again, if you want to know more about these, we covered these sightings in depth in the history of ufology.
Yep, sure did.
We'll put a link to those episodes in the descriptions here for you guys to go back and check those out. Because that was pre-recorded, pre-video days.
Yeah, those are all audio, aren't they? I think they're audio. Yeah.
Yeah, they're over on the website.
Yeah. Many sightings were taking place, though. July 28th, an Italian engineer got several photos of a 30-foot disc resting on a glacier and got pictures of it taken off. July 29th, George Stock took several photos of dome-shaped craft. They were circling in his New Jersey home. And on July 30th, 1952, Albert K. Bender received a very strange phone call.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, you want to read his actual words there, Joe?
Yeah. I received a strange phone call while alone in my den. When I lifted the receiver, there was no reply, but I sensed somebody was on the other end of the line, while at the same time, my head began to spin and ache. No voice answered when I spoke, but nevertheless, I seemed to receive a message as if telepathically. The message decreed I should not delve into the saucer mystery any further. As I listened to the phone, I then heard a strange, throbbing, humming sound, and then suddenly, as if a knife had cut it, the noise was gone. And I got an unusual dial tone without the click of anybody replacing a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
What does that sound like to you guys? We've heard this before.
It's basically a phone tap. That's a basic phone tap that used to happen back in the day. Like when you had an ordinary phone, you could pick up the phone and you would hear that kind of sound.
Exactly. That's because the analog signal, but nowadays with digital,
you can't.
Well, ever since like the late 90s, you wouldn't hear that anymore.
Yeah, you don't hear it anymore. Yeah,
now exactly. That's what you get is like a weird.
But back then, when you picked that, when another phone would be picked up, you'd hear that kind of sound.
But think about this. This is the 50s.
Yep.
His head was beginning to ache. He heard this message being decreed.
Yep.
You should not delve into the saucer mystery any further.
Right.
Where did we hear this? And the humming sound.
Yeah, man. This is the same thing that we'll hear.
And then suddenly, like if a knife had cut it, boom, it was over and the noise was gone.
We're going to hear this over and over again as the UFO phenomena progresses. We'll hear it with Mothman. We'll hear it with several other very, very famous cases. And we'll also go back to a few weeks ago with our contact series that we did. And you'll hear a lot of this going on. The headaches, all that contact stuff.
It was almost like he was visited by the Men in Black without being visited by the Men in Black.
Yeah, this was all from the phone, right? So Bender assumed this was a mere prank or a trick, and he paid very little attention to any of this, other than just trying unsuccessfully to trace the call. But shortly after Bender and his friends released his first issue of Space Review, it was after this that Bender was returning home from a late movie and noticed someone watching him. And this is where it gets, as they would say, very weird. Again, Bender said he got a throbbing headache. You're going to see this repeated, by the way. That was his indication. His
It was
ears,
almost like, it was almost like that was the precursor to something getting ready to happen.
his ears would block up. And in his own words, Joe,
I felt as if something had pulled over my head and shut out everything about me.
now stop for a second. Think about what you just said, because we've heard this before in abduction cases, in contact cases. We hear this cone of silence that comes over and everything just stops.
For some reason, I looked up to the sky, and when I did, I saw a bluish flash. Remember the bluish flash? We've talked about the bluish flashes before as well.
Yep.
At the same time, I had the sensation that my feet were being lifted off the ground. My head.
So he felt himself being lifted off the ground, right?
The sensation of it.
Right. Okay.
Which could be correlated back to an out-of-body type experience as well.
It could be. Keep going.
My head throbbed. So he's talking about his head throbbing again and again and again throughout all these things. Is when I had received the strange telephone call. I had the strong impression that somebody or something was telling me to forget IFSB, to give it up. As suddenly as the feeling came, it left, and my head ceased to ache.
Yep.
Strange. It's very strange kind of incidences that are occurring, and these aren't stories that are being recounted in post. These are stories dating back to 52. These aren't something that somebody talked to him about in 2010 and said, "Tell us about some of this stuff," and he just rattled off this info.
No, this is a very complicated story, because you're going to get two sides of this story. You're going to get the side that came out in the 50s, and then you're going to get the side that came out later when he tells the real story and why he couldn't tell everything. So that's why this story is so complicated and deserves to be told, I think. He continued home.
Put this in his newsletter too. This part of the story.
I think this part was in the this part.
This part was in the newsletter. It was
I believe
it was like the second newsletter that went out, because the first one had just been sent.
I don't know which part, because he refuses to talk about some of this stuff for a while, and then he suddenly just releases it, and you'll hear about that later.
I'd love to have a copy of these.
You can get them. Right? You can get them. I found them. Yeah. They're not bad either. They're like $40-$50 or something like that. It's the whole collection of the newsletter.
Oh, the whole collection.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about it. He continued home, and as he approached the door to his room, he noticed a strange blue glow coming from underneath the door. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. A large object of undefinable outline was aglow in the center of the room. It looked like a bright, shimmering mirage. As I switched on the room light, the strange effect disappeared and everything seemed to be normal. I then noted another peculiar thing. A strange odor filled the room. It smelled like burning sulfur. It was so strong it irritated my eyes. I opened a window to let in the fresh air and began to quickly examine the room, because I had noted that several files of the IFSB records were disturbed. I was startled to find my radio was also on, but without any sound coming from it. His radio was on. It was tuned to a channel where it was just static. Now, let's go back and dissect this a bit, shall we?
Okay.
It sticks out to me. We're seeing these bright blue flashes, the blue shift. We've talked about the blue shift before, and how that the government has recorded that during these blue shift anomalies, high energy output is taking place. Now, could that be some way to teleport in and out? It would take a crazy amount of energy to transmat a mass the size of a person.
Right.
You would have some kind. It's feasible to think that you would have some kind of blue shift.
You would also understand that that headaches, all that, very well could be near field radiation exposure.
Exactly.
extreme radiation exposure, because this is happening in his attic, his apartment, right, in his actual bedroom. So that's the weird part, and it kind of just seems like that's what we're talking about.
So a month later, Albert would meet his visitors face to face at a local movie theater where he sat alone. So keep this in mind. He's alone in a movie theater. He said that he got the feeling he was not alone and that someone had entered the room, and suddenly he felt the presence seated beside him, though no one had been there prior to this. So he was sitting alone when suddenly someone's sitting right beside him, or something, rather.
Mm-hmm.
I took a quick glance without turning my head, and I saw a man sitting there. Then the eyes drew my attention. I turned my head facing him and found myself looking straight into the eyes like little flashlight bulbs lighted upon a dark face. The eyes seemed to burn right into me. I felt like I was spinning in my head, and then the movie screen blurred, and I blinked in my eyes several times and then closed them for a few seconds. And then when I opened them, the man was gone. Yet I heard no movement. Bender was in a trance-like state and struggled to break free and move his head. As he focused, he was able to see the being was now seated to his left, still gazing at him with the same glowing eyes. He tried to break free from the hypnotic glowing gaze and eventually managed to move to another part of the theater.
Now, I would have probably moved way out of the theater at this point.
Yeah, right. Bender, like I wouldn't have been like, you know what? I'm just going to go over and sit over here, yeah. Mr. Glowing Eyes.
I'm not going to do that. I mean, if there's a dude sitting beside me and his eyes are glowing and he's trying to hypnotize me, obviously, I know this. I'm going to probably leave the theater, but not Bender. No. Bender was confused and questioned his own sanity and frightened by the strange encounter, though he was. And he said that within 10 minutes after shaking off that feeling, it returned again. The presence was there again. This time it appeared behind him. And at this point, Al decided he would get the theater manager. Well, at this point, he decides to go get help because, that would be the right thing to do. But they both return back, and they're looking around the theater with the lights now on. There's nobody in the theater. Absolutely no one is in the theater. Shaken and confused, Albert decides just to leave, finally. I mean, that would have been my first thing, but, According to Albert, it was about 10 p.m. while he was walking down Main Street that he peered into a shop window, and he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Now, you guys have felt this before, like someone's kind of watching you, and you turn around. Well, when he spins around, guess what's there? The man with the strange glowing eyes staring right back at him.
I have a question.
Had followed him. Yep.
Is this around the time that the government was experimenting with like remote viewing and all that stuff?
No. No, not really. No. I mean,
that didn't come.
I was wondering if that was somebody like
kind of, but no,
protecting themselves. Maybe
it was. This was the 50s, so that had been kind of looked into or started, I think, at this point, but not to the point of actual applications and the gateway or nothing like that had begun. No. So whatever this was, it was something very, very different.
It almost sounds demonic in a way.
Well, there are people who believe that, and you can see how they jump to that conclusion.
Yeah.
But we also have to remember that we're dealing with something that we've showed. Some of these things can make you see them however you want to see them, or maybe you just perceive it however you want to see it based on your own belief systems. If you believe that, these are an evil being, then voila, your mind will create it as an evil being, possibly.
Or what if what people are interpreting as being evil beings is actually just some form of extraterrestrial of some kind?
Yeah. I mean, that's very possible. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that kind of points to that.
It reminds me a lot of like when people see Bigfoot, they're like, oh, it felt evil. But what they're really feeling is that primal sense of fear
in themselves.
They're interpreting that as something evil.
A lot of these sightings, people tend to anthropomorphize, especially if it's something of an unknown nature.
It's the devil.
the feeling that they feel directly correlates to the nature of whatever it is that they're encountering. Even though that might not be, and most times is not, the nature of whatever you're encountering. You're just placing your human emotions onto this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much what I'm getting. But, you know, the thing is with this guy, his exact quote was, "My fear was not one of meeting another person that a person is afraid of. Instead, I had the feeling that the figure was definitely not human." So he'd already made up his mind, you know, that he's dealing with something that's not human. So now panic.
It would be understandable, though. I mean, he's only
going
experiencing it after he has these episodes.
Mm-hmm.
There's this event that ticks it off, and then all of a sudden the ticker keeps escalating until he almost sees the entity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So now panicked and visibly shaken, Bender sought out the help of a local police officer. Now, here's another little thing. We talked about this with the Mothman sighting, right?
Yeah.
If you're not sure, if you're trying to make something up, you are not going to go and grab a police officer. You are visibly shaken. You are absolutely, you know, you believe it, right? I mean, or you're not going to go do that.
And the officer at least had to take some kind of credence to the story and believe it in one way or another, because he actually returned with him to the theater, and they gave it a checkout and looked to just give Bender a peace of mind.
Yep.
Nothing was found, and the officer suggested that Bender had likely been a victim of a local drunk who was playing tricks on him.
I mean, sure, that's a logical explanation. Occam's razor.
Blowing eyes, apparently.
Right? I mean, it depends on
I want to know
what
what are they drinking that makes their eyes glow? Because I want to try some. I'm just saying.
Sign me up.
Is there some kind of tequila that I'm missing? I don't know.
Well, after this,
you don't want to drink this, your eyes are going to glow afterward.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, I'm down. Let's make it happen. So after all that took place, Albert met ufologist and occult philosopher Dominic Lucchesi.
Lucchesi is where it really gets interesting. Brandon, as you were asking about again and whatnot.
Ufologist and occult philosopher. We've covered many of those guys on the show, and every single one of them, it's a trip. The story gets weird and wild. That's why it makes it on the show. Dom, who would later keep an intrepid enthusiast and author, would stay with him for quite some time. Like, he wrote books. He stuck around with him and became a good friend. And then Gray Barker, our man Gray Barker, pops up, and he begins to discover Albert's secrets regarding the UFO phenomena.
Well, he wants them.
He does. He wants them.
He's writing a little something at the time.
Yep. He's putting together a masterpiece book that would be a staple in all ufologists' libraries. And anyway, he's wanting to get these secrets. He's wanting to know the information that he has regarding the UFO phenomena. And Barker joined the IFSB and became the group's primary field researcher.
Yeah.
After a club meeting, the officers all gathered one evening with Bender, and they heard the sounds coming from upstairs where no one was at.
Well, what had happened here was Barker, he joins, he becomes just appointed, you know, kind of like what we did with the collective. Like we just appoint, you know, roles to people if they want to do it. And it was really just, you know, he had a little business card that said, you know, he was the primary investigator for the IFSB. And they were friends, you know, Barker and Bender were friends, but Barker was trying to get at these secrets. He wanted to know what Bender knew. Now, no one really knew what Bender knew, but he did share them with a couple of his friends, one of which was Dom. And Dom was running interference between Barker and Bender. So he was kind of protecting Bender's work is what he was doing, so it wouldn't get out there. And then, like you said, after the club meeting there with the officers one evening, and it doesn't say that Barker was involved in that. It may have been Dom and the other guy that we talked about before.
Well, to put it's a very good chance that he was at the meeting, because from Barker's home base, like where he lived, to the location where Albert was holding these meetings was only about 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know. It doesn't say that, but it's, theoretically, yeah, it's possible. But after everybody went home, Bender started hearing sounds coming from upstairs. No one was upstairs. Nobody, right? So here we go again. As I reached the top, I noticed that the door to my room was open. I froze as there again was the bluish light emanating brightly from within. Cold chills went through my body. To bolster my nerves, I said to myself, somebody's playing a trick on me. And I picked up a broom from the attic, approaching the door. Looking inside, I saw a bright glow in the corner with some body or object appearing hazily in the center of this blue light. Cut the kidding and come out of there, I cried out in a halting voice. As I spoke, the glow disappeared, but as it faded, the image of 2 glowing eyes lingered for a moment. I turned on the lights and found the room normal, except that again, it contained the odor of sulfur. And again, so strong I had to open the windows and air out the place.
I remember there's a chemical that people often confuse for sulfur. I can't recall what it is, but I wonder if it's that he was.
Well, there's gas. Smelling. There's natural gas.
Yeah.
That'll do it. There's something they put in it that, so you can smell it, because you can't really smell natural gas, right? So they put that in there, and it kind of has a sulfury smell to it.
But it's the chemical that smells like it is hydrogen sulfide.
Is that what it is?
Yep. Okay. It is what is put into the natural gas streams, I guess you call them.
Yeah.
Kind of raw eggs.
Yeah.
Locate, because otherwise natural gas doesn't have an odor.
That's right.
Until you get like right up on it, and then at that point it still even smells just kind of like alcohol. But that is the other chemical. You've got sulfur. But we're looking at something. Let's take a look at this real quick again, because this is a multiple occurrence here.
Mm-hmm.
You have the blue shift light.
Mm-hmm. Again.
And he says that he saw this hazy like being. And he said, cut the kidding, come on out of there. And then the glow disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like whatever mass was there, he's catching it every time. He's catching it up to this point, at least. He's catching this mass as it's phasing from his attic or whatever location it's in into wherever it's going back to or being transported back into. So he's seeing this image as it's leaving, is what it seems like.
Yeah. He's interrupting it, right, as it's transporting or whatever it's doing. That's kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're beaming in, and then he's just like,
they're beaming in, doing whatever they're doing. Then when he gets there, they're like, "Oh crap, hurry up, beam me up,
beam me
out." It almost sounds like they don't quite know how to teleport correctly because they're not fully forming whatever it is.
Or he's just catching it, interrupting it.
He's catching it as they're leaving.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting.
Just since we're talking about Star Trek earlier, we'll just reference that back. When you're seeing them, they're standing on the teleporter beacon, and then all of a sudden they start to kind of phase out, and then they're gone, and it's like off they go. It seems like what he's catching is when they're in that broken matter state, where their atoms are being just ripped apart, if that's even how it works. I mean, I'm hypothesizing here. like their atoms are being shredded and ripped apart and then reorganized on the other end of this thing. It's like he's catching the tail end of them leaving and sees this mass being there and then phasing itself out.
Yeah, it almost seems like they're trying to be very careful not to let him see them at this point.
That's the way I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
But it's quite plausible that Brandon's right too. We don't know what group it is. We don't know who it is.
Exactly.
Let's just hypothetically say it's the government. God knows that if we had that kind of teleporting technology back then, the Cold War would not have been a thing.
That's right.
And, but if it didn't quite work right and all we could do was transport something around the size of a person, then they might not be able to get it just right, but they know that he's up to something and on to something. They want to know what it is.
Right.
So who cares if we give a few people like really, really bad chronic cancer? We're just gonna shred them apart, throw them into somebody's apartment, and slingshot them right back where they came from. And let's just
let's harass the UFO nerd that lives nearby. Let's just harass him a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, these incidents would continue, and Bender would become more obsessed with trying to understand this phenomena. Falling back on his occult studies, Bender began to experiment with various psychic and metaphysical means of trying to make contact with these mysterious visitors in the flying saucers. That brings back memories. He and a member of his group, the officers, though he won't say which one, originated the idea, came up with the grand experiment. Through the Space Review newsletter, he would reach out to members for an experiment. On March 15th, 1953, at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Standard, a day that they called C Day, he asked the hundreds of members to memorize and recite in their minds the following message and beam it toward the occupants of the flying saucers.
Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of the IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends and would like you to make an appearance here on Earth. Your presence before us will be welcomed with utmost friendship. We will do all in our power to promote mutual understanding between your people and the people of Earth. Please come in peace and help us in our earthly problems. Give us some signs that you have received our message. Be responsible for creating a miracle here on the planet to wake up the ignorant ones to reality. Let us hear from you. We are your friends.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like something that would be on a UFO message board back in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they were carrying on this tradition. You got
to remember this continued.
CD5s.
You've got to remember, World Contact Day did continue. It still continues. I mean, it has an actual little following of people out there that actually do this every year. I don't know how many people beamed it out the other day. I don't know. I probably didn't. Albert's goal was to establish contact with the visitors and to assure them that we meant them no harm. However, the results seemed to be opposite of what Bender was trying to achieve.
Sort of like playing with a Ouija board.
I mean, if you don't know what's picking up the phone on the other end,
it
all kind of is working the same way. And somebody picked up the phone, according to Albert. Around 6 p.m., he said he laid down and repeated the mantra 3 times. I felt a terrible cold chill hit my body. There it is again. Then my head began to ache as if several headaches had saved up their anguish and heaped it upon me at one time. There's the headaches again.
You can relate to that.
A strange odor reached my nostrils. You guys get 2 guesses on what this smell is. The first one doesn't count.
Yeah, it wasn't roses.
It was like that of burning sulfur or
Ta-da.
badly decomposed eggs. Then I partially lost consciousness as the room around me began to fade away.
It's kind of like Whiter Shade of Pale right there for a second, wasn't it? I'm just saying. I'm sorry. I just... Anyway.
it's he's having these same experiences essentially over and over and over.
Yep.
The small blue lights seemed to swim through my brain, and they seemed to blink like the flashing light of an ambulance. Now, again, we're thinking the 50s. It's not flashing blue lights like what we have today, that when they're coming down the interstate at dark, it looks as if a UFO is cruising directly your way from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This back then is like, think the Ghostbusters Ecto 1, those spinning beacons.
Yeah, just a
that
beacon.
was
like a party
ambulance
light,
lights.
like a party light. It was like someone had blue party lights on.
Yep, blue party lights, blue and red party lights. So,
but it wasn't a rave.
It wasn't a rave.
No. Go on.
I seemed to be floating on a cloud in the middle of space.
But it wasn't a rave. Go ahead.
It might have been a rave. With a strange feeling of weightlessness controlling my entire anatomy. A throbbing pain developed in my temples, and they felt as if they might burst. The parts of my forehead directly over my eyes seemed to be puffed up. I felt cold, very cold, as if I were lying naked on a floating piece of ice in the Antarctic Ocean. So, I mean, that's
cold. That's cold, dude.
Like, I can relate to how some of this stuff feels like whenever I have a migraine or something set in, but I've never felt as if I was like, I felt cold, but I've never felt like.
I've never been naked in Antarctica cold. I don't know about you guys.
I mean, I've kind of wanted to be. I think that'd be something to do if I ever went to Antarctica.
I'm good. Thanks.
List.
I'm good.
It almost sounds like he was teleported into like an operating room, because you know how cold those are.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Very valid point. I opened my eyes, and to my amazement, I seemed to be floating above my bed. Out of body-like experience going on. But looking down upon it, where I imagined I could see my own body lying there, it was as if my soul had left my body and I was hovering above it, about 3 feet in midair. Suddenly, I could hear a voice, which permeated me and in some way did not seem to be an audible sound. The voice seemed to some form in the room, which it remained pitch dark. So this voice took form.
Yeah, somewhere in the room. He didn't know where.
It was like a loudspeaker or something.
It seems to be like, basically the voice seemed to form or come from the room in front of me, which remained pitch dark. So he was looking in. He saw himself laying there. He was looking into the next room over, maybe. And it was pitch dark, and the sound was coming from there. We have been watching you and your activities. Please be advised. This sounds like an operator call. Please be advised to discontinue delving into the mysteries of the universe. We will make an appearance if you disobey. Well, I mean, that kind of sounds like, all right, I'm going to keep this up because you're going to make an appearance. We're having this moment here.
It sounds like a lighthearted Men in Black threat.
Right?
It's not as straightforward as the Men in Black were later on, but.
Yeah, the first one did. The first one was really straightforward. This one's like, if you don't quit looking up, we will show up. He replied in words, though my lips did not move. Why aren't you friendly to us, as we do not mean to do any harm to you?
We are among you, and know you.
Came the reply. And
must not be disturbed by your people.
So basically what they're saying is like, Earth is the trailer park of your dimension.
Yeah.
We don't want to visit.
Yeah.
We lock our doors when we drive past your planet.
You are okay, but the rest, no. That's kind of what they're saying.
Right.
As I tried to remonstrate, I was interrupted by another statement.
We are among you and know your every move, so please be advised. We are here on Earth.
With this, the voice faded away. but I could sense that something was watching me. My body seemed to drop suddenly, and I once again regained my sense and realized I was on my bed. The room was filled with yellow mist. Not far from the bed was a shadow resembling that of a man. But as I made a move to rise from the bed, it disappeared. The yellow mist was gradually fading, and my room was becoming normal again.
It was after this particular encounter that Bender finally realized he had not been hallucinating.
Yep. Yeah, he realized at this point that this was something that was very, very real. It was an intelligence that was making contact with him and that he had made contact with. So Bender said that after the contact in the room, again, his room smelled of sulfur once more. He tried to get rid of the odor. This time it lasted for days. It was after this particular encounter, though, that Bender finally realized everything was pretty much normal. He had decided not to talk about his experience, though, with other group members. At this time, he feared ridicule and public scorn. Guys, you got to remember, back then,
this is super taboo.
You didn't talk about this stuff, okay? You didn't talk about this stuff. It was like a witch hunt, kind of, you know? If it wasn't
literally
witches, it was commies.
Back then, I mean, this stuff was going to happen. People were going to ostracize you.
Yeah, and that's what he was afraid of. He's afraid to lose his job. He's afraid he would lose, all of his positions and everything. But he said, it's a lonely position you occupy when you have looked into the fantastic and there is nobody to believe you have actually done so. So he's alone in all this, is what he's saying. Well, eventually he decides he's going to tell the truth. He's got to get the data out there. He's a good researcher. That's what they do. That's what we do. We put it on the table, right? So he's going to do that. So he decides to tell the members. Well, one of the officers, both officers, promptly scoffed at him at his accounts. They accused him of seeking further public gain. And another one threatened to actually have him jailed if he published his experience. And they just got Brandon.
Brandon is gone.
Wow.
Be advised.
Be advised. We have taken Brandon. We may bring him back. We may not.
So anyway, though he felt sick, frightened, and isolated by his torment, he pressed on and stated that the July edition, now this was important, the July edition of the Space Review would have a startling revelation. Okay, this is very important. This is where everything gets weird. And you thought it was weird before?
It gets kind of wonky weird.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
This is the Twilight Zone. So though he said he could not publish the revelation he had promised his readers, he did write the account out in secret, and he planned to mail a copy to authorities in Washington. He stashed a copy away in a metal box and hid it. However, when he was ready to actually mail it, he opened it and the box was empty. And guess what it smelled like?
Sulfur.
Sulfur. Ding, 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 ding.
I don't know if any of the listeners have ever smelled sulfur, but if you smell sulfur, it gets stuck in your nose for a long time.
It does.
Yeah. But there would be no revelation. So the revelation never happened. He never talked about it. Okay. And that's all that they knew until later on. So there would be no revelation in July. Bender would instead leave on a 2-week vacation. Returning home, he would encounter again a sulfur smell, and this time his radio tuned to the blank station, again spewing out the static. But by now, Bender was convinced he was dealing with dark forces or something unearthly. Not the benevolent space brothers that seemed to be making all the contact with the contactees he had encountered, but something a little bit more sinister, he thought. That night, as he was going to sleep, he said a strange blue light began to swirl around his room again. He felt himself grow cold, and as he fell to the bed, he could not move as he saw 3 shadow figures now at the foot of his bed.
All of them were dressed in black clothes. They looked like clergymen, but wore hats similar to a Homburg style. For those of you not familiar with that, that's similar to what hat Ron is wearing, but with a curved brim. So the classic Men in Black hat. The faces were not clearly discernible, for the hats partially hid and shaded them. Feelings of fear left me, as if some
peculiar remedy had made my entire body immune to fright. Do not be afraid.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what you're hearing, right?
As he stared into their glowing eyes, they began to speak to him, beaming their message into his mind.
You have dedicated yourself to the solution of the strange problem of unidentified objects in your atmosphere. Your interest is deep and sincere, and you have devoted many hours to it. We also know that such interests and determination might lead to something that could harm you. We feel that you are a very good contact for us on your planet of Earth. You are an average person, and we know that what we tell you and show you will not be believed by anyone you might tell.
Right. You're not important, so why do we give a crap? That's exactly what they told him.
Yeah, we're going to give you our secrets because,
not.
face it,
you want to know?
You're boring.
Okay.
No one's going to listen to you.
Yeah, we'll tell you. We don't care. You're not a threat.
Yeah, but newsletter for nerds. Nobody's going to care what you say.
Yeah, man. They informed Bender that they had a mission and an ultimate goal. They admitted that their presence had resulted in the death of some humans in the past as well. They had
found it necessary to go to great extremes at times to frighten off your Earth people, and it has resulted in their deaths.
They regretted that. They had also taken individuals from Earth to use their bodies as a disguise. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You know, these are some fun people. These aren't your typical.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
You know your friend Jeff, that weird zipper scar that's on his back? Yeah. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, that explains Mark Zuckerberg.
Maybe.
We wish to keep in touch with you and tell you many things because one day you will write about this, and we are certain that nobody will believe you.
Boy, they're confidence builders.
This is great. This is great. This is the most condescending group of aliens ever.
Great.
You will know what is out there in space, and you will know what the future holds for mankind. ...
But no one.
The village idiots.
So no one's going to believe you. So what do we care?
We're all going to laugh at you.
Yeah. The beings then
crazy drunk person spewing prophecies on the sidewalk.
That's happened before. It'll happen again. The beings then gave Albert a relic. Now, this is the crazy part. A small coin-like device with which he could place next to his radio and say a word, which was Kazakh, which would activate the communicator. As they gave me the information, one of them went to my radio and turned it on and switched the dial. I asked him mentally why he was doing this, and he replied only that it was a method of getting back into their base. They disappeared, and once again, I felt my body resting on the bed. I was covered with perspiration, though during the experience, I felt so cold. In my hand was a piece of metal. Finally, I had physical evidence that I was not insane. This cheered me in spite of the shocking circumstances I had just encountered. So they gave him an alien artifact, guys. They gave him.
Did you ever take a picture of it or anything?
No, not that I could ever find.
Well, they gave him an alien artifact, but like, I wanted to be sure before I said anything on video, but Kazakh, all the way down to the spelling, is a Slavic and Russian male name.
Yeah, there's Kazakhstan.
Well, yeah, there's Kazakhstan, but like,
what's it mean?
Well, it's a name. It's just like, hey, it's a full name. I'll look up the meaning real quick because it's just a proper name.
So is it possible that the communists were messing with him?
Yeah, these were space.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, it's
space commies.
Space commies, man.
So it is the shortened version of the name Kazmiriz, and I'm going to see what that means. So it's like, you know, the Joe version of Kazmiriz. And it means, oh, great.
Does it mean burning sulfur?
I mean, pretty close. It means famous destroyer of peace.
Awesome.
Oh,
I love it.
It's a boy's Slavic name, closely related to the Polish name Kazimir, which also means famous destroyer of peace. Great for little ones with a big, boisterous personality.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, they gave him a name that said, "Hey, whenever you want to talk to us, just hit this button, and you're going to talk to the destroyer of peace."
Well, it was the activation word. So what he would do is he would take this device, set it near his radio, turn his radio on, dial it to that station, whatever they gave him, and he would say the word, and this would turn it on. Now, some people who have interpreted this in the occult means say that, oh, it was a magical spell and blah, blah, blah. I don't see that. I see a piece of technology being used. That's me. Because they also said that they use that radio as a means to get into his apartment. That's why the radio was on every time.
The white noise was maybe the carrier signal.
Carrier signals of some sort, yeah, that they were using for the transport. So it's like, kind of think of it like a transporter lock. Star Trek again, right? So think of that as a transporter lock, and then you've got the actual device right there. That's kind of what,
like an interstellar walkie-talkie, basically.
Basically,
I guess, yeah, but they're using an old analog radio to send it all out.
Yeah, they used his old radio.
Bender did think quite often about showing his colleagues this little piece of metal, but when he went to retrieve it, guess what happened? Take a guess.
It disappeared.
Yep, you got it. It would reappear, though, shortly after, a glowing blue hue.
Yeah.
But when he thought about showing it to others again, it would turn from blue to red and got so hot that he was forced to drop it.
Well, that's convenient.
Immediately, he heard the message that it was for him alone and not to be used for glory or gain.
Okay.
It just seems convenient.
Just saying.
Sounds a little biblical too, in a way.
Doesn't it though? It kind of, I mean, you can see that.
Well, as anyone would do, he decided to test the device, so he held the item next to the radio, switched it on, and recited the command as he was instructed. The device glowed blue, and he felt the familiar pounding in his temple and fell back into his bed. I sensed that living part of my body was being transported to some other place, is what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in this out-of-body type experience, Bender said that he awoke in a shiny dome-like room sitting in a chair. He was welcomed by visitors and saw before him a large television screen on which images were projected. The scenes were allegedly from the visitor's homeworld, which they said was many light years away. The beings told Bender that they were older than the solar system itself. Bender was told that the visitor's system was close to Earth, which meant it was apparently easier to reach, and that this occurred many times in Earth's history.
So is he talking to the Anunnaki, you think?
Well, you see, it has that same feel, doesn't it? And it makes one wonder if that's where that came from later, because a lot of
where Sitchin took the idea.
A lot of these stories play out as pieces, that they've gathered and create, their own legends, so to speak. But they said, because many of these are far advanced in their ways of life, your planet Earth will constantly be under surveillance by these systems as they overtake you and pass you by. Your planet is yet an infant as far as progress is concerned. You have far to go
to accomplish what many others in your neighboring systems have already achieved. We've been within reach of your system for a number of years, but will soon pass beyond that point, the point of no return. So we have found it necessary to accomplish our task speedily. We have been taking a valuable chemical from your seas. This substance is vital to our existence. We process the seawater to remove this substance. The sticky residue that remains floats back to your planet in the form of long strings.
According to Bender, that was a reference to angel hair phenomenon.
Angel hair
taking place in the 60s. We've talked about that before too. So was he?
So is it like in the water, or is it under the ocean that they're getting it from, you think?
They're pulling it from the seas, according to what he had learned.
Yeah, because it says we process the seawater.
Mm-hmm.
So is it sodium that they need?
They didn't say.
Well, in seawater, Ron and I are particularly educated in the contents and minerals of seawater because we kept reefs for many, many moons. You've got literally dozens of minerals in seawater: magnesium, sodium, potassium. Like those are some of the more critical to living organisms. Calcium. Those are the big five criticals.
But we don't.
Do you know any that can make a byproduct that's stringy?
Well, we don't know that what they were.
I've seen tank water get real nasty and get slimy and funky. So there's something there.
Oh, we don't know what they were mixing it with either. They could have been mixing.
That's true, because it was the byproduct of their stripping.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So we don't really know what they were doing with it. But the visitors related to Bender that they had many representatives, you'll find this interesting, stationed on Earth and even at the Pentagon. Where have we had that before? They were there to report back and keep them informed of human affairs and situations. The entity, who was appearing to Bender in human form, also made a very ominous claim that seems to relate to current situations within some UFO sightings. The being claimed that they had the power to destroy all of our nuclear stockpiles with the touch of a button.
Yep.
This was the 1950s, guys. We're seeing all of this play out now in modern ufology. People are going back and validating nearly everything that these early contactees had said.
Yeah.
They can't all be crazy. Before his departure, the entity decided to allow Bender to see him in his true form. You shall now see my true form. And what was the true form, Joe?
He then switched to a horrifying picture that made me shudder. It depicted a hideous monster, more horrifying than any I have ever seen depicted in the work of science fiction or fantasy artists. The monster was alive, and he said, "This is like our dogs. We name him Jeff." No. He said, "I reacted in repugnance to the scene. I did not see the speaker leave, and it started again, and I noticed his absence. He then seemed to be speaking from the screen itself and from the mind of the monster itself. It was as if he had instantly changed himself from the form of a man to a creature which appeared to be similar to that pictured by the West Virginia witnesses who described the Flatwoods monster."
The what? Really?
So
what?
You got the sulfur smell, you got the lights and all the craziness. It all adds up. It all sounds the same. Men in Black, all that stuff.
That little fella right there.
Oh yeah, the guys from Flatwoods, that gaseous stuff. Didn't they say it smelled like sulfur?
Sure did.
Sure did.
Sure did. But just because we've talked to Freddie May, one of the boys who was there, and he described what Ron had animated over there as a robotic form. This guy's describing a monster more hideous.
We heard from him. We didn't talk to him. So let's make that known for people.
Well, I mean, I've talked to him.
I have not.
He's friends with my uncle. They go to a church that's like kind of works together on stuff. But he describes a rocket ship looking creature. Or like not a rocket ship, but like a robotic rocket looking creature. That to me doesn't like resound.
No, but it does sound a lot like the thing that they saw the next night.
Right. Over in Frametown.
Doesn't it?
It does sound similar to the Frametown incident.
It sounds closer.
Were they even back then allocating those together? Were they already putting those two instances under one umbrella, and then they've been separated by pop culture and time?
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Because, there's that. He even says that it had, I think, I'm not going to quote it, but I think he even says it had like claw-like hands. And we know that the original Flatwoods monster, the one from Flatwoods, from Braxton County, didn't really have claw-like hands. it was said that it had more of depending on who you talk to, appendages that came out, right? So that's, that doesn't sound like
describe
falling.
more like clamps, kind of.
Well, that's more the one that happened in Frametown.
Yeah, he describes these shiny metal light beam controls, sliding panels, glowing control boards, complicated machinery. He actually encountered a lab technician who now kept the monster form without the need for deception.
Yep. This was in their base that they took him to, and he said,
"You are at a spot on your planet known as Antarctica. We have chosen this area because it is uninhabited, and there is no one here to disturb us in our task. We've made this base by tunneling into your ice-covered surface and burying ourselves with only a small opening through which our smaller craft may enter and depart. The intense cold here does not disturb us, for we are not affected by your range of temperature. Our bodies acclimate themselves readily to such ranges."
This is a long, long time before the conspiracy theories about that stuff, too.
it's probably where they started.
It was also a long, long time before we actually knew about that one location on Antarctica that's like 72 degrees nonstop.
That's true too. But they also he goes on to talk about in the book that these things were very different creatures, that he goes on to learn later that they had males, females, and they had others, and the others were both a male and female. These were the more advanced species that and they were kind of a reptilian. So there's your answer to what you were saying. These are a sort of a reptilian race,
which is kind of what the Frametown creature was almost kind of drawn out, like scaly looking.
Yep.
Have you guys ever discussed that before? I can't remember. I don't think so.
Yeah, we did. We've covered it way back.
There's an episode of Flatwoods that we did. Actually.
Yep. Bender was led further into the craft where he described a meeting with a commanding figure. From a sliding panel on the opposite wall stepped a figure glimmering in a blue haze. He was dressed in a uniform of golden collar. His, or it, had white hair contrasting with its skin of light brown color. As he drew closer, my attention focused on his face of handsome features. He was almost Earth-like. It contrasted to the ugliness I had observed in the others. He was of muscular build and about 9 feet tall. I gathered this was the Exalted One.
It almost sounds like one of the Nords, but he's a lot taller
right?
than a lot of people say.
It kind of does. You get that taller,
the Nordics, right?
Yeah, lighter brown skin, long white hair.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I bid you a cordial welcome to our base of operations on your planet. And it is with deepest esteem that I permit you to be our honored guest because you have given so much of your time establishing friendly relationships with visitors from space. But no one's going to believe you. Having proven to us that you were a trustworthy person."
But we like you.
Right? "Having proven to us that you were a trustworthy person who had much willpower, you, above anyone else, were chosen to visit with us and learn of our purpose here. We have found it necessary to frighten many, but we have also had to resort to graver actions in some cases." Again, referencing where they had straight murdered people.
Yeah.
"Which involved deaths among your fellow Earthmen. We have carried off many of our own people to our own planet for means of experimentation." They're taking people for experimentation. "And also to place some of them on exhibit for our own people to see. We have specimens of people from many planets, but some of them do not live."
Regrettably.
Basically, like, we built a zoo.
That's exactly what they did.
"We built a zoo, but we didn't do the research on how to take care of you first.
You guys
Good
keep
luck.
dying."
These, the dead ones, we preserve. Such has been the case of many of your Earth people. They have not survived."
Earth people do not survive well. They are fragile.
What do you mean? You need water and oxygen.
Your people are fragile and weak. And you are dumb, so we do not care if you tell people.
Does this not sound like something from Resident Alien?
Yes.
Like straight off the pages of Resident Alien. Or this other one. There was another one that it's currently on Hulu. You can go watch it. And it was like all these different aliens working together to try to
This hurts me.
sabotage the human race.
This totally hurts me. Anyway, Bender went on to question the entity and was told many details from religion to dietary needs of the species. Yeah, he asked them what they ate.
And then at that point, he was like, yeah, no wonder you're like killing us all when you take us off planet. You have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, pretty much.
A constant strain of pizza.
No, they're trying to feed them mushrooms because that's kind of what they eat. They grow fungus and they eat fungus. But he goes on to have these big philosophical questions with these beings, and they tell him basically everything's a lie. Everything's a lie. Your whole life's a lie. We all come from this one source, this one bright light source. But there's no God. But there's one bright light source, and that's where we come from. And it's intelligent, but there's no God. That makes sense.
I mean, that is how the Old Testament describes God on many occasions.
Labels. Even the aliens know labels. Anyway, he was told not to write about any of this, by the way, guys. Okay. So this is where that missing great revelation went to. This is the great revelation that was never told until later. So
he was told it was all clear, but the beings had to be out of range and their mission had to be over.
So
then he could publish the account.
When the
I just want to bring up how that speaking light being actually ties to the story of Moses a little bit, because you remember he said he saw the burning bush and then he came back and his face was glowing.
Yep.
And Jesus did the same thing when he went up on the mountain. He came back, his face was glowing really bright, and the apostles couldn't even look at his face because it was so bright.
Well, the whole thing that you have to remember is there's definitely parallels here. I can see this whole thing. What we just saw was Enoch. This is what happened to Enoch. They took him up. They hey, here's the tour of the ship. Look over there. You can see the curvature of the earth. Wait, it's round. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to Enoch, but yeah, I mean, this is the same kind of thing. This is a advanced something taking this guy up and saying, hey, you want to come look around? Go ahead. They were just nicer to Enoch. They liked him.
Yeah.
They obviously didn't like Bender. I mean, they liked him, but they didn't like him.
They ridiculed him a lot. Like you are dumb.
You dumb human. Come watch.
No one will believe you. We'll show you. This is going to be great.
This will be fun.
I always felt like in the Bible, whenever God was talking to people, he was just trying to really dumb down everything as much as he possibly could to get them to understand what he was saying.
They're humans. Yeah. What do you think? Anyway, he was told not to write about any of this, like Joe said, and not to publish anything as long as he had
a Bible.
Don't write anything as long as you have the metal discs. When the beings were out of range and the mission had ended, then and only then will he be free to publish it. And he did what he was told. That when the disc disappeared, that's when he wrote his book. That would be like 10, 12 years later or something. So Bender's research had drawn local media attention as well, guys. And this is important because it backs up the fact that this really happened. This wasn't just a guy who was, his story got out, and he was interviewed. And he was interviewed by Lem McCullum from Bridgeport Herald, November 29, 1953. And the title of the article was Mystery Visitors Halt Research. So he told some about being followed by the men in black at that point. That was in 53. So that's the part that he actually, talked about. The other parts he didn't say anything about. But to McCullum, he thought that it was just government agents. And what's funny is when Bender actually came forward in Gray's book, he hinted that they may be government agents, though he would not answer directly any of those questions. He hinted that they could be, government agents at the time, and he was told that he could not answer. He had taken he had sworn to secrecy, and that it was in the best interest and so forth, and he was afraid he would go to jail. So he believed, according to Gray, that they were government. It was later that he would say, nope, that's not exactly what happened. And now that the disc is gone, I can tell you the full story, the real story of what happened. So In 1956, one of the IFSBS members would pen his own book and include Bender's accounts. That was Gray. And would solidify the legend and terminology that we now know as the Men in Black. In 1962, Albert K. Bender would put it all together of his various strange encounters and fill in the missing blanks of his own book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men. Albert stressed how the dark-suited visitors were mind-manipulating silencers in this book. Bender stated the visitors, the three men, were not from the government, but they were from outer space. Their faces were partially discernible as their hats were shaded them. He also said he had observed these men floating about a foot off the floor and that their eyes lit up as flashbulbs. They seemed to burn into his soul. We talked about that before, but here's the thing. He saw them floating. How far off the floor? About a foot. What else floated?
Flatwoods.
Yeah. He saw them floating. There was that yellowish mist, and it
was all around the same time.
Bingo. So is it really possible? This is just a hypothetical thing, but is what's really in Bender's room that night 3 Flatwoods type monsters, and he's just seeing them as human? Are they projecting it into his mind that they're, these men in black? Remember, their eyes glowed. Their eyes flashed of light, the same thing that the monster did.
So basically, the Flatwoods monster incident was basically the Flatwoods creature being like, oh crap, this is exactly why we lock our doors when we go past Earth. Oh God, what have I done? Get the ship fixed now. Right. I gotta hurry.
We had scared off people when necessary.
Yeah, they did.
Freddie said it was like a sentry. It was guarding the area where the ship crashed. This all makes too much perfect sense to me. After you really look at the chronology of this and you hear these words, it's like, could this possibly be? Now that we know that there's a possibility that these things have been shown to actually manipulate our mind, make us see what we want to see or what they want us to see. Dude, it's very possible that was from the same species that the Flatwoods monster was, and that the Flatwoods monster was not a one-off.
Yeah. That's what it seems like.
Fascinating to me.
There were a lot of parallels.
Absolutely fascinating to me.
After publishing his autobiography, Bender abandoned his research into UFOs, supernatural occurrences, and everything in between. He left Bridgeport for California. Coincidentally or not, after moving his house where he had said to have made contact with otherworldly beings, it was razed to the ground as part of an urban renewal project and the building of I-95.
Mm-hmm.
In 1965, he founded the Max Steiner Music Society, again with prominent members and again publishing a newsletter. The society ran until 1981. Bender himself left this world on March 29th, 2016. If he ever made further contact with the visitors, he never spoke of it again. Bender's greatest legacy, besides the introduction to the legend of the Men in Black, was the introduction of what would become World Contact Day. On the events of the 60th anniversary in 2013, World Contact Day was extended into a week-long celebration, which is kind of what you guys have gotten to experience this week with us.
Yeah, we always observe World Contact Day, but we wanted to really do it big this time. Now, we skipped one part as we were reading our notes here, and it's kind of important. His final part, it was in October 1953, the final newsletter. Because what did happen, like you said, is he quit. He was done. He's out. This was after this event, right? When they said, you can't say anything. So in October of 1953, a year and a half after its founding, the IFSB shut down. The Space Review final publication included a cryptic message from Bender himself. He said, "The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to be very cautious." That was it. And then he literally dropped it off.
That was it. That was literally it.
Until he wrote his book in 1960. What was it? 62.
Yeah.
He literally dropped it all at that point. After he wrote the book in 62, he did drop it. This isn't the guy who ended up going to conventions. This isn't the guy who ended up talking about this ever again. That's kind of rare.
I mean, according to the other entities, no one would believe him anyway.
Yeah. So, I guess maybe they hypnotized him into believing it was pointless.
Yeah.
So that's the story of Albert K. Bender, Gray Barker, and how it all relates to the Flatwoods monster in some weird way.
Really bizarre turn of events there, but there's something up. There's something weird with that. There's all the parallels that are taking place. There's all of these strange blue shift lights, which we've heard talked about. There's all of these strange this sulfur smells and other gaseous odors
floating off.
And you see these in multiple accounts that go from Bender's story all the way up to modern day.
Hey, guess what I just read interesting about hydrogen sulfide? Do you know what else it's used for?
What?
Creating rayon.
It's weird. I think we all agree.
Yeah.
So I understand we have a listener submitted account, Joe. Much like Mr. Bender himself, we also receive accounts from everyone out there, and we disseminate them to the public, and we will continue to do so until the Men in Black tell us to stop.
Or until we're told that no one's going to listen to you.
No one's going to listen to you anyway. So
tell us that all the time.
Well,
right.
All the time.
That's
all good. That doesn't stop us.
So this incident took place sometime between 1975 and 1978 near Roanoke County, Virginia.
You can give the name as well. She's good with it.
Oh, Anita.
Yes.
One of our favorite people over on the live, always active in the live comments.
Yeah.
Anita Allen, thank you for sending in your story. So it was a normal late summer evening. Our family had gone to a popular Italian restaurant for dinner called Villa Sorrento. At the time, it was located in downtown Roanoke City. We lived out in Roanoke County off Route 419. As it was late summer, the sun was still setting after our dinner. The sky, more peach, orange, and gold than blue, I recall it as one of those perfect cloudless, warm evenings. Leaving the restaurant and heading home, we'd seen a bright light over Sugarloaf Mountain. We lived at the eastern base of Sugarloaf. Of course, we knew it had to be Venus, the evening star. UFOs were something on In Search Of, right? So, but after, it was all still fun to imagine. Being bouncy children, we insisted our parents follow the evening star home. This was easily done as it was in the direction of home. There was a little to no traffic, so the drive was fairly quick. As we neared the mountain, we realized Venus was staying in position to the mountain and becoming slightly larger. I don't recall very clearly, as we were only just realizing that this wasn't normal. Cresting Glen Heather Drive, looking across Route 419 on our neighborhood, it was clear it was something hovering there. No flashing lights of any aircraft. It was giving off a brilliant white light, but there was clearly something in there. There was no traffic, so we proceeded home across 419. As we drove to our street, we could see it hovering to our left. It was a large object, emphasis on large, like a funny-shaped hot air balloon. We didn't draw that analogy at the time. What we saw as we approached was not a ball of light. The light was reflecting off the object. As we approached it, it became possible to see more past the brilliant white glare. The object was mostly a beige to gray in color. It looked like an inverted bee skeet hanging over a three-bladed ship or a plane propeller. I wondered how it was something with propellers like that, like a helicopter, fly if they weren't spinning. At this point, Dad had stopped the car. We were in front of Bunny's house in our big, old, dark green Oldsmobile Delta 88.
Your audio is breaking up, dude.
I love me a Delta 88. Don't worry about the audio because it'll correct itself in post due to the studio settings. Affectionately known as the Tank. Hey, that's what I called my Delta 88 too. As the craft was...
I mean, they are.
Right? It's solid steel body. That's the thing. I wish I could get another one. As the craft was hovering to the left over the houses, and Angeli and Mom slid over to my side to look out the window and see it. Mom said to stay in the car, meaning don't roll down the windows and hang out them. I recall the propellers were a steel to gunmetal gray. They seemed shiny, no designs or markings. The skeet was more matte beige gray, and the beige was probably a reflection of the orange evening sky. And each tier, sorry I don't recall how many, had a ring of tiny round lights on it. Some, however, were dark. For the most part, I recall them as white, maybe a few pastel tones here and there. Several were dark as if the lights were out. My immediate thought was that it was like portholes on a cruise ship, that perhaps this is what it was, an alien cruise ship. The very center, lowest tier, was all red light. It was neat to look at because you couldn't focus on it. It was all modelly kind of swimmy. At the time, we did not have laser toys, but aim the dot at white wall and stare at it, and that's what it looked like. So I think that it was some sort of laser light, but I saw nothing on the ground affected by it. Suddenly, the craft began shrinking. I mean, it got small, fast, and then it seemed to shoot off to the right and up. We realized that it hadn't shrunk, that it in fact shot straight up and away from us. But because it was above, there were no reference points for size or speed. All this time, there had been no sound or wind either. At this point, neither Ange or I asked what it was, since it was clearly not Venus or a hot air balloon. Mom said it was an experimental Air Force craft. Given Mom's side of the family, that was good enough for answer for us. Dad took a look at the tank. Dad took the tank out of park, and we finished the drive home. All that was said was Mom saying we wouldn't discuss this as it wasn't anything. Your mom in black. Mm-hmm. The next evening, I was riding my bike and saw Bunny in her yard, and I stopped to play and tell her about the Air Force thing that we'd seen over her house. Bunny turned pale, and she said she didn't think that it was an Air Force plane. Bunny was about 10 years older, and so she had been home alone the night before. We hadn't seen a car in the driveway that night. She said that she had not felt well. She had migraines and headaches, I recall. Well, that sounds familiar. Something that plagued her regularly, as I recall. So when her folks went out for dinner, she had planned to rest. They were going to bring her back something later. She said that when she had taken a nap and had a really weird dream while they were gone. She said that she had dreamed that she had woke up and the lights were, and it was still light out. She saw a small man who was in all white, big head, dark eyes, no hair, and little mouth. He was short, about 4 feet tall, I think. And he was standing in the hallway looking down, looking in her room at her. He saw her look at him and fled down the hall. She leaped from the bed and gave chase, but he was faster. She heard it go down to the basement stairs and into the living room. She then heard the basement door slam and then ran into the living room window that looked over the backyard. She saw two of the white men running across the backyard to a whitish disc that was floating. It seemed over the fence. Just this side of the lawn, palm trees separated the swimming pool behind them. The men ran under the disc and the moment later rose higher and seemed to float along the fence heading west. Bunny said she didn't know why, but she didn't feel upset about it or them being in her house. So she just went back to bed. When her parents came home and woke her, it was dark out. She told them what she dreamed. She knew it had to have been a dream because everything was fine in the house. The basement door was locked. And if someone had been in the house, she certainly would have not had to gone back to bed. When I told her about what we saw, it made her really upset. And she went to tell her parents. Nothing else came of it, but a year later they moved and we lost touch. I actually remember her telling us this story in person.
now that I read that last little bit, I remember her telling us a story in Withville last year.
So that's a listener's tale, and
that was
that's
a good one.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Probably one of the better ones we've had, honestly. So yeah, if you guys have your own tale that you'd like for us to put on here, and you'd like to hear it, then by all means send it over to us, and we will definitely get it up there.
So if you want to reach out to us, you can send a message to wildandweirdwv@gmail.com, or you can go over to wildandweirdwv.com and hit the report a sighting tab. We will get it there. Just type somewhere in there that we have permission to read it over the radio show.
Yep.
And we'll give it a go. If not, if there's no permissions in that, by the way, we do not read or disclose your information. It's all private and anonymous. We keep all that stuff really tight and really close to the chest, so you won't have to worry about any of that ever getting out.
Unless the Men in Black want it.
Unless the Men in Black.
We can't do anything about that. They just come and take it, apparently. So,
remember, if you're watching us on YouTube and you're not subscribed, you definitely want to do that, because we have new content coming out on a weekly basis. And there's also bonus content that gets dropped from time to time of us being out in the field, and you don't want to miss that. If you want to try to find us on social media, you've got Horror Brandon over on that's your Instagram handle, and you are Brandon or author Brandon Wills over on Twitter. Is that right?
Reverse on Instagram. It's Brandon_writes_horror.
Oh, there we go. And Ron is Lanham Ron on Instagram, and the Mothman Artist on TikTok. I'm just Joe Perdue, and then over on Instagram, Skinwalker Sculpts. You can also look us up at Wild and Weird WV on Instagram and find all of the craziness that we're up to there as well. We just started a new subreddit. That's a thing. Thanks, Brandon. We're doing Reddit now too.
Brandon will be heading. Yeah, Brandon's going to be heading up all that and a few other goodies for everybody to make sure that we can get out there to all of you, the entire world.
Generate a larger audience and get out there to a bigger crowd.
Yeah.
Because the crowd right now we have is already global, and we're looking to expand that reach to interstellar very soon.
Yeah,
and you definitely want to subscribe and stay up to date.
Probably after that, we're going to go interdimensional, I think.
Yeah, definitely after. Definitely interdimensional. Yeah. So, guys, remember, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about Wild and Weird Radio. You won't regret it, we promise.
And if you do, every Thursday.
And if you do regret it, nobody will believe you.
No, they won't.
And every Thursday we're going live. The live shows are a huge hit. Everybody's loving the live shows. We love the interaction that we get from you guys. You all asked for this, so we're doing it week in, week out. We love it. We're having a blast. I can't say any more good about that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of interaction with people. It's off the cuff. It's on the fly. It's not a rehearsed show, so to speak. And it's very spontaneous. And we just have a great time, man. It's a lot of fun.
And not to mention the random special guests we get. Just like last night's episode, we had one of our favorite ancient astronaut theorists on board with us. It was great.
He said yes a few times. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So you definitely want to check those out, because you never know who's going to show up, guys. Well, we don't have a whole lot else left there. Remember, if you want to support the show, you can always do that by telling your friends about it, going and subscribing and liking and sharing.
If not, go buy some t-shirts. We
can sell plenty of t-shirts over. Ron has designed a ton of great t-shirts.
Buy some t-shirts. Go grab you one. There's some good stuff over there.
All of that stuff helps make sure that Wild and Weird Radio stays free for eons and eons to come with no paywall. And I think that's all we have.
I think so, yeah.
So remember,
be advised.
Wild and Weird Radio wants to hear your stories, because no one else will believe you.
No, they won't.
Stay wild and weird, everybody.